In the hours, and in fact the days after the horrific shooting in Las Vegas, the president repeatedly said, now is not the time to talk about policy, now is not the time to talk about politics, that's for another time, right now we need to mourn the dead. Yet this morning the president launched into a political argument with Senator Chuck Schumer on Twitter, literally hours after this incident yesterday. Why was he so quick to go the political route and point fingers at Chuck Schumer for the fact that this person was in the country at all?
Well, look, this wasn't about going the political route. This is something that, frankly, the president's been talking about for a long time. This isn't a new policy. This isn't a new position. This isn't a new conversation. The president has been talking about extreme vetting and the need for that for the purpose of protecting the citizens of this country since he was a candidate, long before he was ever president. This isn't a new argument, this isn't a new position, and this wasn't new for the president to speak about it.
We heard today at about 11:30 this morning from the mayor and the governor of New York, who had said at that time that the president had yet to call. Has the president called his mayor, his governor? He's in New York.
The president has spoken with both the mayor and the governor of New York. No.
Sarah, why wasn't Uzbekistan on the travel ban list?
As we've outlined multiple times before, those are determinations made by several factors. In large part, Congress helped play a role in determining a lot of those factors in placing specific priorities on different countries, and that would be the reason that they weren't in part of that.
Calling for Uzbekistan to be put on the list?
Look, that may be something that's looked at, but that isn't something that we have called for at this time, but certainly haven't ruled it out.
I'm just curious why.
Look, I think again there are a lot of different criteria that we use to determine which countries should be on there, and they haven't been determined as one of the countries yet. But I'm not saying that that's been ruled out either. Jordan.
Thank you, Sarah. On Senator Schumer, can you tell us when is the last time he and the president spoke, and more broadly, the president saying that he is responsible, at least in part, for this attack? Does the president still see him as someone?
Before you go any further, let me be really clear. The president has not blamed Senator Schumer and doesn't feel that the senator is responsible for the attack. We believe very strongly that the individual who carried out the attack is responsible and no one else. However, we do think that there are policies that could be put in place that help protect American citizens. We've been talking about those for a long time, and we continue to push and advocate for those policies.
Does the president still see Senator Schumer as someone he can work with?
I think we'd love to work with Senator Schumer to pass legislation on extreme vetting, and if he's willing to do that, we would absolutely welcome his support on it. John Decker.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. The president was asked a little bit earlier when he was meeting with his cabinet about the possibility of sending this terror suspect to the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and he said he is indeed open to that. Does the president believe he has the authority as commander-in-chief to send this terror suspect to Gitmo? That's my first question. And my second question is about Gitmo. What advantages does the president see in sending this terror suspect to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba?
Look, the point he was making is that he supports or would support that, but he wasn't necessarily advocating for it, but he certainly would support it if he felt like that was the best move.
Are there advantages in terms of sending any terror suspect to Guantanamo?
That's a question I think we'd have to dive into deeper and certainly talk with the interagency process before answering that. Matthew.
Thanks, Sarah. The president said last night that he'd ordered DHS to step up, quote, our already extreme vetting. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit specifically about what extreme vetting entails and if there's any indication that it might have had an impact on preventing yesterday's attack.
Sure. Some of the specifics for extreme vetting would be enhancing the collection and review of biometric and biographical data, improving our intelligence streams, improved documentation requirements and verification, improving information sharing with partner nations and foreign law enforcement and intelligence services, and an overall heightened scrutiny and more thorough review procedures for CBP and other agencies that would play a role in that process. Major.
Sarah, separate from the Guantanamo Bay question, does the president believe this suspect should be classified as an enemy combatant?
I believe we would consider this person to be an enemy combatant, yes.
Would the president therefore instruct the Justice Department not to charge him in federal court and to therefore use the powers of enemy combatant and that status to treat him differently, not only in terms of interrogation, but prosecution?
I don't believe that determination has been made. I think that's something we'll wait till we get a little further into the process.
To not having him charged at all in federal court?
Again, I said we haven't made that determination, so I'm not going to speak to that yet until we've gotten.
You said you're open to the enemy combatant thing. You think
I
he
said
is
we
an
would
enemy?
consider him to be an enemy combatant, but
Do
in
so
terms
now?
of how we would process, yes.
And on what basis?
I think the actions that he took certainly justify that.
Does the green
Kristen?
card status in any way influence that determination?
Not that I'm aware of. Kristen?
Sarah, I want to follow up on the question John was asking you earlier. You're making the case that these are not new policies he's talking about. And yet the question still remains. He is delving into a policy and political discussion, and he and you were very clear after the Las Vegas shooting that it wasn't appropriate to talk about policy. So what's the difference now?
I said it wasn't appropriate to politicize the conversation, which I don't believe we are. We're talking about protecting American lives, and there are things that this president has consistently and repeatedly talked about, advocated for, pushed for, introduced executive orders for, supported legislation for, time and time again since long before he was even president of the United States, that support this position. It's not a new position. There are facts that we know about this horrific tragedy that we know caused some of the things in this horrific tragedy that I think determine what those policy positions that he's been advocating for long before yesterday are very consistent with the activity that could have prevented something like this from happening.
The president invoked Chuck Schumer's name, so how can you argue that it's not a political argument that he's making?
Look, Senator Schumer has supported these opposing policies, and I think that that is a very basic fact. Margaret,
It's not
voted
unifying
against them
the
for the Gang of
country.
Eight.
Is he failing
That's
to
not true.
unify the country at this
he
critical
helped.
moment?
He helped implement them on the front end long before the Gang of Eight, and the Gang of Eight would have only addressed one part of that problem, as we've talked about many times before. He may have helped isolate one part of the problem, but it would have exacerbated so many other parts of the problem that fall within our immigration system. If you only address one part and not in the totality of it, and introduce a fully and more responsible immigration reform like the president has proposed, like the president has outlined, then you're not addressing the problem, you're not fixing the problem, you're only making things worse. Margaret?
Republicans have voted for it, Sarah?
Margaret?
When he's talking about quicker, greater punishment, is he just talking about better enforcement of laws that currently exist, or is he talking about some sort of extrajudicial process, and are you looking at doing an executive order that would empower him? Would he make something like that public, or would you consider doing a secret order? And very quickly, I also want to ask you, is he really serious about tying the Obamacare mandate stuff to the tax thing, or that seems like you would just blow the whole deal up, blow right through that Thanksgiving?
Very different questions.
goal?
Let me try to address the first part in terms of, I believe he was voicing his frustration with the lengthy process that often comes with a case like this. So I think that was simply the point he was making. In terms of the mandate, we're focused on pushing through tax cuts and tax reforms separately. Obviously, we've never made it a secret that we'd like to repeal and replace Obamacare. We'd still like to do that, but we still think it's probably more likely to do something like that in the spring.
Sarah, Chuck Miller, the Deputy New York City Police Commissioner, said the suspect committed the attack in the name of ISIS. Governor Cuomo said the suspect was associated with ISIS. How can the president make the case that we are annihilating ISIS when an attack like this occurs? Are his policies emboldening the remnants of ISIS?
Not at all. We certainly, I don't think there's any way that you could discredit the progress that has been made on ISIS with a total defeat taking place in taking away their strongholds in both Raqqa and Mosul. But when that happens, as the president even said today, you have people that splinter off, go other places. Look, and we're meeting them in each of those places as much as possible, and we're going to continue to do that. It's another reason this president wants to institute extreme vetting to help keep more people out of our country that want to do us harm.
Thank you, Sarah.
Sorry, I was pointing at you.
The President said earlier, today starting the process of terminating the diversity lottery program. What did he mean by starting the process?
Just that we're going to continue pushing for and advocating for getting rid of this program. Something he's talked about. We'd like to see the lottery visa program not be part of any immigration system that we have in this country.
Okay, sorry, just to follow up on Margaret's question. So the president isn't considering any broader criminal justice reform?
As I said, we'll look at other specific ways to deal with it, but right now he was simply addressing his frustration with the lengthy process. John Gizzi?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. A follow-up question on John Decker's question. The criterion that you listed for enhanced vetting sounds very much like that for a national ID card, a subject that comes up every few years in Congress, but which has never been acted on. Is the administration in favor of a national ID card as part of the enhanced vetting?
Look, we've laid out what our principles and our priorities are, and we'll work with Congress on determining the best way to make those specific pieces of legislation. But the things that I outlined are what we'd like to see, and whether or not what form that comes in, that's yet to be determined. But those are the principles we'd like to see take place in any extreme vetting program.
You're not ruling out a national ID card as part of the
right, but I'm also not saying that we're fully in. I'm saying that we've laid out the principles and the priorities that we'd like to see and that we think are important in an extreme vetting program. Blake?
Between the time the president sent the tweet out last night saying that he's called for a step up of extreme vetting until now, can you lay out exactly what has been stepped up in that time frame?
Look, I think he's taken a call to action. I know he's spoken several times with members of his national security team to look and see what specific things can be done. But we have put in place executive orders already since the president's taken office that help go as far as we can at this point.
Forward on tax reform real quick, if I can, do you mind? It's possible that one of the things that Republicans are looking at right now is drastically lowering the cap for 401ks. The administration has consistently said that this tax plan has to help the middle class. So how would bringing down the cap on 401ks help the middle class?
Look, we're continuing to work with the House. I'm not going to negotiate, as I've said, I think every day this week with you guys here in the media. I'm going to let the economic team here at the White House work with members of both the House and Senate to put forth the best bill possible. We also are making sure that the priorities that we've laid out, including helping the middle class, are part of the final piece of legislation. We support where we are in the process right now, and we're going to continue working with both the House and Senate to make sure we get there. Eamon?
Thanks, Sarah. On that tax cut bill, what does the president want that bill to be called? There are reports that he wants to call it the Cut, Cut, Cut Act. Was that correct?
Look, I think the president, if it's called the Cut bill, great. I think that the biggest priority that he has is making sure it does what he's laid out are his priorities in that piece of legislation. That's providing tax relief for middle class. It's making it more fair. It's making it more simple. Those are the things that he's mostly focused on. If it's called Cut, 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 and it includes massive tax cuts like this president is proposing, I think we'd perfectly be fine with that name.
If his Federal Reserve Chair pick is a man or a woman?
No, I cannot tell you that, but I can once again echo that it's not Major Garrett again today. Still consistent on mentioning. Poor Major. Go ahead, Peter.
Sarah, the president talked about wanting merit-based immigration today, and criticize the diversity visa program. Is he aware that the diversity visa program actually does have a merit-based component to it?
Look, there may be a component of it, but the fact that we have a lottery system that randomly decides who gets the greatest opportunity in the world, one of the best things that we have in this country is the fact that everybody wants to be here, and to give that away randomly, to have no vetting system, to have no way to determine who comes, why they're here, and if they want to contribute to society is a problem. And the president strongly supports making sure that the people that come here want to be here for the right reasons and not to bring harm to our country. And I don't think that's something that any American should want to support. Jim?
Are ranked by their job that they have had, and they have to have minimum education
Peter, the
requirements.
whole idea is that they are randomly selected. This isn't
criteria and having certain rankings. It's not entirely
it's the
random.
lowest level of criteria that any part of our immigration system has is through the lottery system. And so to try to argue that this is a system that thoroughly vets people is just shows a total lack of understanding for what this process is.
People have come in since the Uzbek gentleman yesterday came in. 350,000 people come to the country on this program. One of them now apparently has been accused of a terrorist act. 1 out of 350,000 create a problem then for that program?
There may be more. Look, all I know is that you can't randomly select people and not have them thoroughly vetted and not have the ability to know whether or not these people want to do good things or bad things when they get here. I don't think it's unreasonable to ask that people that want to come to this country go through a vetting process to make sure that when they get here, they want to contribute to society and not harm the people of this country. Sure. Jim.
Why did the president call the U.S. justice system a joke and a laughing stock during his comments in the debate?
That's not what he said.
He said that the system of justice in this country is a
process.
joke.
He said the process has people calling us a joke and calling us a laughing stock. Look, I think, as I told Margaret, he's simply pointing out his frustration of how long that this process takes, how costly this process is, and particularly for someone to be a known terrorist, that process shouldn't move faster. That's the point he's making, and that's the frustration he has.
Separate subject, if I could, just other folks have a couple of questions each. Getting back to George Papadopoulos, does the president recall at that March 31st, 2016 meeting of his National Security Advisory Board, Mr. Papadopoulos suggesting a meeting between then candidate Trump and Vladimir Putin? Does he recall that?
No, I don't believe he does. April.
Sarah, 2 questions. First, Mary Frances Berry, the former head of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, says everyone wants vetting, but to stop people from coming because they come from different countries is totally wrong. What say you?
Nobody said because they come from a different country. I think that's the whole definition of immigration, is that they wouldn't be U.S. citizens. We certainly haven't said that immigration as a whole should be outlawed. So
the diversity lottery is specifically for those coming from other nations that you are not favoring right now because you believe that there is a possibility of terrorism.
I believe that we have a fundamental right to protect the people of this country, and if we see or think that someone is a threat to United States citizens, that we should take every precaution that we can to protect the people of this country. And I don't think most Americans would disagree with that. In fact, most Americans do support extreme vetting and certainly support the protection of the citizens of this country.
And second question, last question, compromise, the issue of compromise. What is the definition of compromise as it relates to slavery and the Civil War?
Look, I'm not going to get in and relitigate the Civil War. It's like I told you yesterday. I think I've addressed the concerns that a lot of people had and the questions that you had, and I'm not going to relitigate history here.
When you left, so and I'm going to ask the question again.
Why don't you ask it in the way that you're apparently accusing me of being?
I'm not accusing. I'm asking a question, Sarah. Seriously, the question is: does this administration believe? Does this president believe slavery was wrong? And before you answer, Mary Frances Berry, a historian, said in 1860 there was a compromise. The compromise was to have southern states keep slavery, but the Confederacy fired on Fort Sumter that caused the Civil War. And because of the Civil War, what happened? The North won.
I think it is disgusting and absurd to suggest that anyone inside of this building would support slavery. Peter.
Yesterday from that podium you said all of our leaders have flaws. Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt, and Kennedy. What are President Trump's flaws?
Probably that he has to deal with you guys on a daily basis.
In fairness, he doesn't deal with us on a daily basis. So what would you say in sincerity?
Most every day, actually, he does.
What are his flaws then, I guess? Simple question.
Yeah, I just gave you one. Trey.
Thanks, Sarah. 2 questions for you. What does the future of Guantanamo Bay look like under the Trump administration?
I don't have any announcements or changes or adjustments to policy at this point.
Follow up on last night, could you give us a little bit more of the tick-tock of how the president found out about this terror attack in New York City, how he immediately responded, who he got on the phone with right away, just trying to get a better understanding of where he was at this time, what he was doing, and what actions he took following the news?
The president was in the Oval Office when this took place, and he was first briefed by General Kelly shortly after it happened. I'm going to take one last question.
Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
No, right here.
Thank you, Sarah. Will President President Trump look for enhancing anti-terror measures with other foreign countries during his visit to Asia? And also, will President Trump call the leaders of Argentina and Belgium to express his condolence.
I believe that arrangements are being made for him to speak with the leaders of those countries. They're working between the two teams to set that up. In terms of looking for conversations around anti-terrorism, that will certainly be discussed throughout the trip over the next several days. And as I said earlier this week, General McMaster will be here tomorrow to discuss the trip in more detail and certainly in more depth for the briefing tomorrow. Thanks so much and have a good day. We'll let you know later today what time that should be. But both will most likely take place in the afternoon. Thanks, guys.